Listen, guys, thank you for having me speak. I I'll try and say something useful. Um, I, as a physician, I tend not to say no, and because I never say no, I wind up at 2 in the morning wondering how the hell am I going to fix something the next day. And most of the time, I treat problems in the brain and spine. I've done that since about 1994. And along the way, I've invented things and filed about 64 patents. Um, and I'll just go through some of my thoughts around this, which hopefully will be A, interesting, because I want to keep you interested, and B, might be even educational. So the issue of where inventions come from is very interesting to me. I don't use the word innovation much. I think it's really fatigued and overused. It's used by my administrators a lot. Um, I think inventions come from engagement of like the heart and soul in what you're doing and agreeing to treat challenging patients. Inventorship is not about commercialization. It's not about money. It's about public service. And um, inventorship is effective in a way like chemistry, in a way that money isn't. Inventors create cultures around them like chemical reactions. And then, like the ancient Greeks, they share their ideas at meetings or symposia, just like the ancient Greeks did. And we meet, and we can't do this in COVID, but we meet online tonight and discuss and share our ideas and infect one another with these ideas. Um, as a professor of interventional neuroradiology, I have to recruit wisely. And there are some interesting numbers. Inventors, people with inventorship genotype, phenotype, uh, are more likely to be immigrants. And in this xenophobic culture we see south of the border now, it's interesting to see that immigrants make up 13% of the US population, yet make up 1/3 of patent holders and 25% of US Nobel Prize winners. There's a cultural behavioral type of Myers-Briggs classification for inventors that can be captured by this phrase that you can make a wild person tame, but you can't make a tame person wild. Necessity is the mother of invention, and without necessity, you don't get invention. Natural resource rich countries are less inventive than those with less resources. Um, a culture of invention requires firing people who are mediocre, requires moving vans. Now, one of the challenges we have in Canadian healthcare is no one gets fired. It's a shame because sometimes people are mediocre and need to get fired. And we need to have turnover in staffing in order that young, talented people can get jobs. And, in my department, if you get hired, you're there for 40 years. And unless somebody dies or leaves, another spot doesn't become available. And that kind of sedentary ability to just keep your job actually inhibits invention. The Americans do that bit really well. Some companies like J&J, they fire the bottom 10 percentile of people every year. I kind of see inventors like elements in the periodic table. There's a lot of carbon in the periodic table or in life in general, but the inventors are more like the rare earth elements and the noble gases that are more precious, more rarefied, interact when under pressure, and we need them in trace amounts. If we have too much of them, we don't get a lot done, but we need iodine, we need helium, we need argon. We have a lot of carbon, but we need trace amounts of these other elements in the periodic table. Inventors tend to be relatively geeky. We tend to have a knowledge perhaps acquired through degrees, but perhaps acquired just through our reading in our own private time that makes us more knowledgeable about technologies in adjacent fields. Physics is critical to this, and a good knowledge of the biomechanics of things, the mechanical properties of metals, the physical properties of chemistry of chemicals is really important to being a good inventor. Now, where I invent most things is in my Angio suite. where I'm most focused, most alert, most engaged, most alive. My wife is tired of hearing me the night before I do a procedure being stressed, but then coming home the next day really happy because I love what I do, but doing it the night before in my head, rehearsing, anticipating the problems I'm going to come across, having a plan A, a plan B, a plan C, a plan D prior to the procedure the next day makes me stressed. But then during the procedure, I've rehearsed and achieved a flow state which lets me anticipate all the elements in a procedure. And at the end of the day, when, as usually most things go okay, then there's a tremendous relief and happiness and satisfaction. But that rehearsal beforehand allows anticipation by being pessimistic of the problems you can come across, and often the development of a new technique, a new approach to disease, or a use of a device in a different way that allows you to successfully treat that patient's problem. Now, humor is similar in many ways. If you think of Robin Williams, you know, he's got had a great inventor's mind. So sad he's gone. One of the best fellows I ever hired did this. He and his friends dressed up as traffic bollards on Halloween, and they stopped traffic in downtown Dublin, dressed up as traffic bollards. Here they are stopping a double-decker bus at a crosswalk. And like, so there's a relationship between humor and invention, and it's a similar association of unexpectedly related things and the creation of an unexpected outcome, which kind of defines what invention is and kind of defines what humor is. Inventors tend to be funny. And if you put a bunch of us, like in the Society of Interventional Radiology, put the patent holders together, it tends to be a funny evening. This is a graph of patent filings for medtech over the last 15 years at the USPTO. And you can see that the number of patents are climbing here. Now there's an 18-month window where you don't find out what's going on because they're held confidentially. But there's been a sustained increase in patent filings over time. If you look at these patent filings, you find that foreign corporations are responsible for 31% of them. US corporations and medtech are responsible for 61% of them. Foreign governments, quite a small percentage. Individuals are responsible for about in total 8% of these patent filings. You break these numbers down more, you find that in terms of the corporations, there are standard medical names that crop up who have filed medical patents. So Abbott, Philips, Siemens, Covidien, Boston Scientific, Cook, St. Jude, GE file these patents. In fact, 49% of issued US medical device patents are not associated with these big companies, but are held by small companies with less than 50 people. And 62% of these patent holding companies had less than 20 people. And the majority of those companies were pre-revenue. It used to be that patent filings by physicians was deeply frowned upon. The first patent filing by a physician was in 1846. And in 1847, the American Medical Association said it was derogatory to the professional character for physicians to hold patents for any surgical instrument or medicine. Now, this behavior towards inventing still persists in Toronto. And the U of T makes it very difficult for an inventor because of the conflicts of interest associated with those inventions. And so there's a dichotomy between their language of supporting invention and innovation and their behavior, making it very difficult for anybody with a conflict of interest to actually be involved in clinical research. There's a puritanical element to this, a Jansenist element to this, which is quite frustrating because in their language to their donors, they talk about the need for innovation. But in the language to their physicians who invent, they treat us like we're all guilty of some derogatory behavior. If you break patent filings down by specialty and look at physicians who filed them, you find the valuable professions, the valuable medical specialties. You find 11% of patents filed by physicians were from orthopedic surgeons, 10% were from cardiologists, cardiovascular surgeons, 9% from general surgery, 6% from anesthesia, 5% from internal medicine, 5% from ophthalmology, 4% from diagnostic radiology. So I could tell you that the most valuable specialties, the most valuable companies are in orthopedics, cardiovascular disease, the heart. So orthopedics, spine, the heart, the eye, the prostate, interventional oncology. And that's where most ideas come from. If you look at the practice setting, most people who file patents are in a group setting. Only about 8% are working in medical schools. What are common traits amongst these inventors? There's a lot of association and networking that goes on. There's a lot of experimenting that goes on. There's a lot of observing and connecting the dots. And there's a lot of questioning about why we do what we do. I took the entire membership of the Society of Interventional Radiology, 6,000 members, and I cross-referenced their patent filings with patents at the USPTO and PCT. And I found that 457 members of the society held 2,500 patents. And I built social network maps of them. And these social network maps showed that there are key institutions where these people work, and they're inner city teaching hospitals. They're the classic great institutions: Hopkins, UPenn, Hammersmith, University of Minnesota, Stanford, Brigham Women's. And from those places, I could identify individuals. And as these individuals moved, I could see that that inventive behavior moved with them, and they created new social networks of inventiveness no matter where they went. So it's about key individuals working in key institutions that create hubs of inventiveness, enabling inventiveness, mentoring people in this in certain locations. Now, ideas have genealogies, just like families have genealogies, and medical procedures have genealogies. You can do this in mathematics as well. And this is the genealogy of the development of a procedure called vertebroplasty. And I would be over here, and I was about the 5th person to start doing this. So networking, experimenting, observing, and connecting dots, mentorship, legal advice, hubs of inventiveness, going to scientific meetings, sharing ideas, meeting people. This is an image of Charlie Dotter talking to Bill Cook that led to the formation of Cook Medical. Charlie Dotter was a totally crazy interventionalist at the Dotter Institute in Portland, Oregon. We see these traits in art as well. So this works in art, it works in literature, it works in movies, it works in music. If we look at Da Vinci, Da Vinci did all these things. He had a notebook. In his notebook, he kept his sketches. In his sketches, he rehearsed. He would sketch something, then he would vary it a little bit. There was simple repetition and variation and maybe flipping things left to right. Here's the same essential drawing flipped left to right by Da Vinci, experimenting, inverting layouts. And here are elements of a drawing individually practiced in his notebooks, which he then integrated over time into specific drawings. So inventors do this too. Um, okay, here are some of my ideas that I've worked on over time. The spine devices started when I was a fellow in 1998. My antioxidant company is going well. We have 5 employees. My CPR device and detection of flow in the carotids, only about 2 years old, is doing well. Amber is a method of transporting tumor tissue to keep it viable for immunohistochemistry. Medlantis failed. I lost $450,000 on it. One of the things that people underestimate is timing. Timing is critical in all this. So I shut down Medlantis in December of 2019 because I couldn't support it anymore. It was an online educational company, 7 years of work. I had to shut it down. 3 months later, with COVID, we would have succeeded. My ozone company is a disc herniation treatment company that's doing very well. And then there are several other things. My company Vexim exited for 140 million euros. My company Etex exited for 75 million euros. I've been heavily involved in Synaptive, which is now worth probably 3 billion or so. Let's just talk about vertebral compression fractures and how I developed devices in that area. I did not want to be involved in treating compression fractures. My staff, when I was a fellow in Geneva, told me I was going to do this. Vertebral compression fractures occur in benign and malignant disease. It's the leading cause of admission to nursing homes. There are about 800,000 fractures a year in the US. 66% of them heal spontaneously or with drugs. 33% fail conservative treatment and need an intervention. It's that 33% that we treat. Here's the spine of a very famous Canadian, somebody I was honored to look after. He had 4 compression fractures. You see them here. He's made his life miserable. And, you know, the treatment of doing these things is to put in a lot of hardware. And that clearly is not something that is benign. I mean, a lot of people die after this procedure and or die before they can recover from the procedure. So I developed this method of treating these. If you have a vertebral compression fracture and it's untreated, 40% of patients die. If you have 1 fracture, the risk of another fracture is increased 5-fold. If you have 2 fractures, the risk is increased 12-fold. If you have 3, the risk is increased 75 times. The number of vertebral compression fractures correlates with progressive decline of quality of life, and the more fractures you have, the more likely you are to die. My plan was to create a safe, cost-effective, ultra-low pressure injection system to relieve pain in benign and malignant disease, to educate physicians on how to do this, and to develop a system that was so cheap it could be used anywhere in the world. So I came up with needles by working on cadavers in Geneva. I developed a route into the vertebral body through the pedicle of the vertebral body. And then I made cements that could be injected safely. Here are Murphy needles. These have now been used over 1 million times. These are the original ones. I used 4 of them yesterday. And a very nice man, actually a chess grandmaster from the Ukraine, moved to Canada in his 70s, had vasculitis, put on steroids. Steroids caused osteoporosis. He had compression fractures, couldn't walk, in a wheelchair. We treated 4 levels. He did really, really well. And today he's up and walking around. We put the patient on an angio table. This is a biplane angio suite. Make sure they're comfortable. Place the needle in the vertebral body. This is a video of the cement being injected into the vertebral body. So this is the embolization of a vertebral body with a liquid polymer cement, and it distributes in the vertebral body and then undergoes an exothermic reaction and sets in the vertebra, fixing the fracture. Traditionally, this cement was used by dentists or by orthopedic surgeons in the hips and knees. I increased the cement density so we could inject it safely by adding barium to it. I did that in 2001. And we made this a much safer procedure to do. Here you can see the pedicles of the vertebral body. Here's the cement injected into the vertebra. I then developed a method of navigating in the vertebral body with nitinol needles so that you can inject multiple levels from one vertebral body. I developed a needle that you can navigate in the vertebral body by making it flexible and steerable, so it could go down one side of the vertebra and then move around within the vertebra. It's pretty cool, because you can navigate in bone. In tumor, it's much messier. The vertebral body is more vascular. There's a greater risk of cord compression or cement embolus. You have to be more careful. Here you can see I injected cement that went from one level to the other through contiguous tumor. You might have heard of a guy called Mandelbrot who talked about fractals. On the left is tumor cemented with bone cement to treat fractures, and you can see it's irregular. On the right is osteoporosis, a benign disease. You see the cement is cohesive. So if you apply fractal analysis to bone cement, you can identify malignant versus benign disease. I learned to play with the different elements of the cement to understand the different factors that determine the cement properties so that I could control the cohesiveness of the cement and make it stick together better to reduce the extravasation risk. On the left is a low viscosity cement being injected into the vertebra. On the right is a high viscosity cement. You can see on the left, it spreads all over the place. On the right, it sticks together. The right cement is more cohesive, more viscous, safer than this cement, which is more likely to go to the lungs than this one. So if you're going to invent something, you really need to be a content expert. It's all about the mechanism of action, the process of approval through the FDA, and then achieving reimbursement. But you've got to understand the mechanism of action. You can't be a dilettante. Investors will spot a dilettante. You have to work out the physical properties of what you're doing. You need to understand how to do it personally. So with very viscous cement, I learned that I could move bone fragments. Let me do that again. Here you can see bone fragments moving just with the viscosity of the cement, restoring height. Okay, pretty cool. So making cement so cohesive, you can make it move bone fragments. As you mess with the properties or manipulate the properties of the bone cement, I learned that exothermic cements can kill tumor. So this patient was alive, had cement injected here into their tumor. The cement did not go into this recess over here. When they died, we took their vertebra out. And we found where the cement had gone, the tumor was dead. And where the cement had not gone, the tumor was viable. So this told me I needed to make hotter cement to achieve better tumor kill. This is the Rita ablation device, and each thermocouple on each tine can be used to measure temperature. So in living patients, we passed the needle down one pedicle, deployed it in the vertebra, and then injected many different types of bone cement and measured the temperatures that those cements achieved in the living patient. And we looked at the peak temperatures, and we looked at cold cement and hot cement, and I came up with the idea of making a very hot cement for tumor, and then a cold cement for osteoporosis, so that we could achieve a kind of ablation like radiation therapy in the vertebral body by using RF ablation type temperature. And then in addition, we went on and developed a CIHR funded, MITAX funded project using RF ablation in vertebral bodies. I started a company with the bone cement people called Vexim, and we developed a spine jack for restoring height in vertebra. And this is used now around the world. And it's a little Volkswagen car jack that you place in the vertebra, and then it expands when you shorten it to restore height. We developed software here to allow us assess the height restoration pre and post implant. So here's a compression fracture. In there is a spine jack. We cement it into place. We measure the height pre and post, and we can show the height restoration. So again, you see, you have an idea, you make the device, you develop the software to analyze the impact of the device, you train colleagues to use it by going to meetings, running training sessions, word of mouth transmission of the idea to people. And this is how you share and disseminate an idea. And it takes years. It takes 10 to 15 years after you have the idea for it to get to a point where people cannot remember when it wasn't done. I can predict where somebody's going to fracture based on their biomechanics. If I could prophylactically augment bone, I would do it between T8 and L2, because that's where people break their bone with osteoporosis. If I was to develop a cement that was able to prevent fractures, I would deploy it in those areas between T8 and L2. But still, after 10 years, the FDA is not willing to approve this. I combined calcium phosphate cement with a drug called Forteo, or teriparatide, so that the osteoporotic bone could integrate that calcium phosphate cement and grow new bone. We did a whole series of experiments demonstrating that we can grow new bone. And yet, our billing system is structured so that we let people fracture and then do a procedure when they're ill and get paid for that, rather than do something before they fracture. I know that kidney transplant, liver transplant, lung transplant, bone marrow transplant, people will fracture. I can tell you where they're going to fracture. And they wind up in hospital, and then we treat them with polymethyl methacrylate cement. Based on their bone density, I could predict who's going to fracture and prevent that happening. Yet intellectually, socially, culturally, anthropologically, my colleagues are not willing to do that yet. In the next 10 years before I retire, I'd like to get that fixed. We made a cement that stimulates new bone formation, that prevents fracture. And culturally, we don't do this. It's really stupid. To deliver that cement, I had to develop a new type of injector with no lure locks, otherwise the chalky cement de-wets. I got those patents issued. I developed a vibrating needle, like a ball bearing in a raceway with compressed air, that vibrates and moves the cement into the vertebra like a shower of embolic material. This is traditional cement injection. It goes where you predict it will. This is the distribution of vibrating cement, like little ball bearings going beautifully around the vertebral body. And if it starts to go somewhere you don't want it to go, then you turn off the compressed air. So no matter how good you are at these things, how creative and inventive you are at these things, the cultural adoption of things, which usually follows being able to bill for it, determines a lot of what you do. I have a whole bunch of patents on this. I spent about $100,000 in these patents. And it was very frustrating because, I spent most of my royalty income on doing this because I believed in this. And then for years, having had my stuff made by Cook, I was approached by a private equity group called Shore Capital in 2016. And by 2017, they'd acquired my product line from Cook. They're interested primarily in EBITDA, cash flow positive, non-core product lines that are already in the marketplace. And they aggregate these things. But for me, this was phenomenal because they acquired all my unlicensed IP. And so now, of my 64 patents, only 6 are not licensed. And I'll get there with those. Those are new things. So they rolled up these different things, and we built a company. I'm a director of the company. It's based in Maryland, in Towson, Maryland, just outside Baltimore. We have 35 employees, and we're in 4,000 hospitals and clinics worldwide. Their plan, being a PE company, is that they'll be acquired probably by next March for about $140 million. And the plan is that we stay on and do this again. And into this company, I put more ideas. IZImedical.com. Let me show you some of the ideas. We acquired some great ideas that had failed in other people's hands. Benvenue. Failure is normal. It's frustrating, it's horrible, but it's normal. Benvenue had spent $130 million developing this great device. They had terrible execution of the idea. They ran a great clinical trial, got FDA approval, 32-center clinical trial, 280 patients, prospective randomized study, showing this vertebral body implant worked beautifully, particularly in metastatic disease. They had CE mark, they had Health Canada approval, they lost it, we're getting it back, they had FDA approval. So we acquired this device at IZI. We acquired a device that had cost $130 million to develop for about $5 million. And we did it better, we're doing it better. We've applied to CMS, the body that determines Medicare reimbursement, for additional reimbursement above and beyond the normal, and it looks like we're going to get it. And this is exciting because you place this in a vertebra, you then inject cement down through it into it, and in a lithic destructive tumor, you get very good stabilization. So there's all my pre-existing portfolio. There's this, and then in addition, there are other things now that are in IZI. Traditionally, if somebody has a sacral fracture from metastatic disease, we put needles in, we put multiple needles in, and it hurts. And we inject bone cement. And it looks like this. And it's good, it works. But it's a difficult, long procedure. I developed an 18-centimeter needle that we pass from one side, and with that single needle, we then inject cement from a single approach. So through IZI, I was able to take one of my regular needles, make a bigger, longer, scarier one, and do this. I developed a new half-handle needle. When you've got maybe 8, 9, 10 needles, these 11-gauge needles in somebody's back, all the handles collide. My new needle folds. So it folds like this. Instead of being like this, it folds and it takes up half the space on the operating room table as it comes out of the back. So we have these half-handle needles. And there are a whole bunch of other things. We're now the 4th or 5th largest maker of biopsy systems in the world. All the breast biopsy needles called Copens, all the Sheba Francine biopsy needles, we make those. We acquired them all from Cook, all the radiation therapy devices, the beads and localization devices. We've built a complex company by integrating different things, putting in new ideas, reducing the cost of manufacturing, reducing slack in the system, adding novelty, adding innovation, the classic private equity path. I've never done this before. It's been great fun. They have such confidence because they've deep pockets. So now we've gone from an idea that I had in 1996 when about 40 patients were treated, 100,000 people treated with Murphy stuff last year, about 1 million people over the last 12 years. So again, where do good ideas come from? Looking after patients. Continued nuanced iteration based on daily experience, not saying no, showing up and doing the work, really understanding the mechanism of action of what you're doing. How do we sustain the pressure of doing this? 90% of the time I'm a doctor at Hopkins or Toronto Western Hospital. Well, hobbies are really important. This is a beautiful book, a little book, about 90 pages, written by Winston Churchill in the 1930s when he was out of favor with the world, when no political party wanted him. And he said at the very first paragraph, hobbies sustain us during prolonged periods of stress. Paintings sustained him. How do we nuance these ideas? How do we perfect them? Well, periods of isolation allow us to understand what we believe, to understand our technology, or understand our approach, understand what we want to do, see flaws in our ideas, nuance the ideas. If you look at Newton during the Black Death, Darwin on the Beagle, Descartes during the 30-Year War, developing Cartesian coordinates, Galileo when he was under house arrest, Chadwick, the brilliant Chadwick, who developed the cyclotron, discovered the neutron, as a thought experiment while a prisoner of war, 1914-18, kept in a horse box for 4 years by the Germans as he invented and discovered those things in his head. So don't be sheep. Be willing to think beyond the boundaries of what you're expected to do. Reflect on why you do what you do and what doesn't make sense and how you can do it better. Thank you. I hope I haven't spoken too much. This is my hobby. I race cars. And I'm terrible at it, but it's fun. Thanks for asking me to do this. Cheers.
Thank you so much, Kiran. That was such a great talk with a lot of key learnings on the medtech entrepreneurship and environment and innovation. I think we have a couple questions from the audience, and actually I do have a question, which is, I think, yeah, like the audience. So I think we do have a large number of people with interest into medical entrepreneurship, with kind of the twin intentions of both earning profits as well as giving back to the society. And while we do need to encourage the growth of this sector, it's imperative that aspiring medtech innovators do not simply jump on the bandwagon without thinking wisely about how they can make a mark in this field. And like any other entrepreneur, medical entrepreneurs face many problems in commercializing their work. So I was just wondering, what are some of the things you wish you had known before embarking on the entrepreneurial journey? Those things that our innovators would need to know now or keep in mind in order to maintain a successful foothold in medical entrepreneurship?
It's difficult. I think the most important thing is the people you work with. Anytime things have gone wrong, I knew at the time I didn't like the people who wanted to work with me. And usually, if you have a sense that there's something wrong with the people who want to work with you, it only gets worse. The company that failed, we had a problem. And we lost a couple of years with poor leadership. There was a company in New Jersey that's since folded. I licensed all my parathyroid hormone bone cement patents to them. It was run by a pair of guys. I didn't trust them. I should have listened to myself. I didn't. I knew on that train journey home, I didn't want to work with people like that. And I did work with them and it failed. And you can lose years of work. So physicians, healthcare workers, people in the healthcare industry tend to trust too much. Do your due diligence on the person who's approaching you to work with you. If somebody comes to you and say, I'm available right now to work with you on this great project. I've got friends at BMO or guys in the Middle East with money. Really do your due diligence on those people to make sure you understand why they're available right now. What happened in their last job and the job before that. Spend the time to investigate the people who want to work with you as much as you did in developing the idea that you hold so dear. And that's probably the biggest mistake. I've been too trusting a couple of times. Put a good team around you that's brighter than you and let them do their job. And then be kind when you're doing these things so that when it's stressful, you're not being a schmuck, and you're looking after the people who are equally stressed. Um, Handle your investors' money as carefully as you would handle your own. And, you know, it's a small world. You're going to work with these people again and again and again. Um, I work with a group of guys and people in Utah, and I've worked with them for 10, 15 years. They're some of the best, I call them safecrackers. They're some of the best safecrackers I've ever met. They're really good at turning an idea into a reality. Um, you know, and I don't have to do NDAs with them, and I don't have to do letters of reference or letters or whatever. You know, we don't really have meetings with agendas. We have phone calls. Um, it's challenging in an academic institution with tech transfer offices to be flexible and agile. But you have to work through that system, and you have to be transparent in that system. Um, you know, but I think doing your due diligence on the people who want to work with you is really, really critical.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. Yeah, another question I think about, you know, how should non-clinicians or people, you know, engineers or other people when with a non-clinical background can go about finding problems to solve? Any insights on that?
You know, work with busy people, and you know, so I think kind of work with happy people, right? You know, if somebody is kind of continually expressing personal angst and frustration about their job, don't work with somebody like that. It's not going to be a happy experience. Work with enthusiastic, happy people, and in happy labs. One of the best things I ever saw was Peter Agri um, got the Nobel Prize for aquaporins, and I had to speak after him at a meeting. And he brought his Nobel Prize, and everybody was holding it. It was really cool. He brought his entire lab to Stockholm to pick up that prize. Those are the kind of people you want to work with, you know. Um, don't work with some guy where it's all about him. It's not going to be cool. It's not going to be enjoyable. And if it's not enjoyable, you're not going to do your best work. Now you want to find uh, things that need to be addressed, clinical needs that need to be addressed. Again, busy people, and in the areas that I mentioned: orthopedics, cardiology, ophthalmology, interventional radiology, interventional oncology, interventional neuroradiology, the device-heavy fields. Ophthalmology, it's hard because it's done so well, there probably isn't a lot that can be done better. So maybe find a field that's done badly and find gaps. I've been working on liquids for a while. This is a liquid to transport tissue. This began when I discovered that we only grew gram-positive organisms when we biopsied infected tissue. That we were really bad at identifying gram-negative anaerobes. And it turns out that when a biopsy goes from Toronto Western to Toronto General and then to the core lab at Mount Sinai, that can take 10, 12 hours, by which time all the anaerobes were dead. So we made a liquid for transporting anaerobes and aerobes. And then we looked at pathology tissue and found that formalin is carcinogenic. So we made a transport liquid that is based on the liquid used to transport transplant organs and keep tissue alive. And we added 10% honey as a fixative to it, because that's what the Egyptians and the Romans did with cadavers. So find a space. There's a space there between when I take a biopsy and when it arrives in pathology where no one owns it. So that's an unoccupied space. It's rare to find such a big space, but find unoccupied spaces. You know, it's great if you can do that.
Thanks, Dr. Murphy.
That help?
Yeah, for sure. A question from one of our residents: how do you balance your clinical duties as a physician and your many different enterprises? During my medical training, we have little exposure to innovation and medtech, and especially entrepreneurship. Who was a mentor to you when you started?
Yeah, you know, first of all, my boss in Geneva, Daniel Rufinow, I chose him because of his brain, not because of his volume. So back then, 1996, most years not even born, but just a great guy. He was a good person. I could learn from him. He was kind, smart, paints and acrylics, thinks outside the box. And so I went there for a year. It was a difficult year. I was skint, was cycling a bike around Geneva, eating a lot of pasta. Sort of small one-room rental while Roland, my wife, was in Michigan, Ann Arbor, Michigan. We were having a baby. So those moments of sacrifice often build a career. And that made a huge difference. Danny Rufenach said to me, Kieran, you're going to do vertebroplasty. And I said, no, not doing that. I want to coil aneurysms. He said, no, you're doing vertebroplasty. And then I discovered I was one of maybe 5 people in the world doing it, and it was done really badly. So that launched that side of it. When I came back to Baltimore, to Hopkins, my chairman, Elias Serhuni, sat me down one afternoon and told me how to develop a company around this. He went on to run the NIH, and then now runs all research for Santa Fe, Winthrop. He was George Bush's representative to the Middle East for science and education. Remarkable guy. But he took the time to sit down with me and tell me, give me some guidance. And that was very generous of him to do. I think those moments create who we are. It's kind of like an electron passing down a cathode ray tube, and it bounces off the different deflectors, and eventually the final image is created. But it doesn't stop. When I took all those members of the SIR, looked at their inventorship, at patent filings, I found there isn't an age when this stops. People who are inventive throughout their life. So you have time if you're inventive. It isn't something they can turn off. There is this Silicon Valley myth that basically Caucasian people invent in that environment and they're funded by VCs in Menlo Park and they're in their 20s and 30s. Well, that's bullshit. People who are inventive throughout their life, come from all walks of life, all genders and choices, and all races and immigration sources. They're not PhDs. They're everyone. They just have a creative tendency that needs a little bit of guidance, a little bit of mentorship, a little bit of help along the way, a little door opened somewhere to help them achieve their potential. And that's the job of people like me and Amit to do that. And that's one of the most fun things I do.
Thank you, Dr. Murphy. I personally have a question which is kind of related to the COVID-19 pandemic. The impacts of COVID-19 is in countries and territories around the world has brought irreversible changes to our lives, the global economy, and the healthcare systems. And perhaps the immediate focus for health systems globally has been in preparing for and responding to the crisis. I think health leaders around the world are increasingly looking toward the post-COVID-19 new reality for healthcare. And I think the emerging evidence from health systems around the world is that COVID-19 has already provided the spark for long overdue changes to the way that we receive and deliver care. I think the new reality for healthcare will probably require a kind of a redesign of care systems to address our patients' needs and healthcare needs. In your opinion, how do you envision this redesign of the care system, and what would be the most promising areas of innovation or entrepreneurship that have the potential to sustainably reduce growth in health spending and possibly lead to improvements in the quality and accessibility of care?
Yeah. So as you were speaking, I was jotting down things. And when I jot down things, I do this little thing called a mind map, and I just slap everything on one page, and then I sort it out in my head. First thing, COVID is brilliant because money is going into healthcare like never before. Healthcare IPOs are booming. Stupid ideas are getting funded, but there's going to be tremendous focus on funding of inventorship, of new ideas. And this is great because people have finally realized that that it's in all our interests. Um, it's profitable, it's sustainable, it's recession proof. Previously, people have been putting money into oil, gas, property, you know, apps that were meaningless. And now intelligent money is going into funding good ideas. I'm thrilled to see that. There's huge opportunity here to change how healthcare is delivered. The fact that we're doing this meeting this way, the fact that I speak to my patients from Barry, from Sudbury, from Peterborough, without them having to drive all the way down here and visit, is great. It's so much healthier. I don't need to have those patients coming into the hospital and losing a day work or all that discomfort or potential exposure to infection. Vaccinations, not a cool area. About 15 years ago, I worked with a guy. The company was called Define. It was a spine company. The guy's name was Russell Hirsch. He said the craziest thing to me. He was a Kieran, pandemics, great opportunity. But he was absolutely right. Now, he was saying it from the horrible money-making approach that human suffering was the source of great profit to him. And that morally is repugnant, obviously. But there is an opportunity here to fund a more efficient way of making vaccines. We're going to see greed, embarrassing behaviors by humans with COVID. We're going to see stockpiling of vaccines and drugs, which is not how sentient beings should behave. And nations and cultures will define themselves by how they deliver vaccines to their people and to other cultures who are less fortunate. How do we deliver vaccines in evolving cultures in Africa and in Indonesia and the Philippines and less fortunate countries? You know, there's going to be technological challenges with that. How do you deliver a vaccine that has to be stored at -80 in somewhere that is tremendously understaffed with physicians like Malawi, which has the second lowest ratio of doctors and nurses to population in the world? We're going to need to do better to do that. I think this whole issue is going to bring a focus on global warming also. And we in Canada are luxuriously fortunate in our ability to tolerate global warming well because of where we are. We can, you know, we're going to suffer less than a lot of countries. But we're also going to have to step up to the plate more than we've done. We haven't really acted as an international power since Pearson. And we should do that, both culturally and morally and medically. I think, you know, how I talk to the patient is more difficult with Zoom. I'm used to shaking hands with somebody, and there's something about that fundamental touch which imparts compassion and empathy and establishes trust. It is strange to meet a patient for the first moment on the morning of their procedure when they're really stressed and they don't know that I care about looking after them as much as they would have if they'd spent 40 minutes with me in a consultation room. I have to find some way of overcoming that barrier to the establishment of empathy. But, you know, in terms of the disease management, education is going to suffer. I haven't seen my research students in my office. Haven't gone for a cup of coffee with them. Haven't gone to Kensington Market and walked around and got hot dogs with them or whatever else, you know. That piece I miss. But I think good stuff is going to come from this pandemic, as it did from every other pandemic that the world has suffered from. There'll be a boost of investment. There'll be a boost of creativity. We did a fun thing. I took the patent filings and I spaced them over time. And I correlated that with global disasters, and World War One, World War Two, Korean War, Vietnam War, uh, the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. And after every war, there's a boost of creativity. There's also a boost of physician engagement, physicians as writers, physicians as poets or artists. So engagement in society increases with every disaster like this. All these disasters are associated with a greater sense of membership in a broader culture. And that's a good thing that will come from this. Long-winded answer, but hopefully it helped.
Yeah, we're keeping our fingers crossed, and hopefully this is.
Yeah, I think we'll be okay.
Yeah, one final question from one of our students. Were you always inventive and innovative growing up? I always wonder if people naturally have a knack for these kind of things, or did something change for you that made you want to solve problems in the world? Yeah, I think the question points towards that, entrepreneurial opportunities and what kind of skills or capabilities on part of the entrepreneur, and whether these skills could be learned or if they are kind of, inherited. Genetics play a strong role or factor in here.
I think this is a classic case of nature and nurture, right?
Yeah.
Being able to have the nurture is a privilege, and it's a privilege of having two parents. Most of the world doesn't have two parents. And then getting an education that enables that nature to be developed further. Having an education that was largely free in Ireland, where I grew up. Irish culture and Canadian culture are very similar. Today, even more so than when I grew up there, but free education, being able to go to university. I was the first in my family to go to university, first in my extended family to go to university, actually. But my parents made sacrifices to make sure I went to university. And then you choose, as a person, further education over money, right? Do you stay in an academic environment, or do you migrate somewhere, or do you keep a job in one place, or do you choose a particular mentor? We move country for intellectual reasons. That's a luxury. Instead of people migrating for warmth and safety and food, which is a necessity that we see too often. So, and then what country do you come to when you immigrate? Cities go through windows of incandescence and innovation at different times around the world. It's not constant. Greece was only great for 28 years in a narrow window between two wars. And in that window, they gave us Aristotle and Plato and Socrates and Aristophanes, and they met in the marketplace, not in an academic institution. They met in the agora, the market, and they met and had meetings, symposia. It's interesting to look at that. Now, Canada has the opportunity to be such a place now. We've seen the inhospitability of the US and the fractured nature of the society. Perhaps they've lost their moment. It's over, that empire is finished. We have wonderful immigration, like me, like I'm to this country, of bright people who choose to be here, to a system that has free healthcare and largely free or affordable education. There is academic debt, but it's nothing like the $500,000 debt that you would get in the US for a medical education, where only the privileged few can afford the $100,000 a year to go to a Barnard or a Columbia, post-tax, But in Canada, we have people coming here because they want to be here, because the nation represents something. We have meetings like tonight where we discuss the creation of new ideas. This is perfect. This is a great time to be Canadian. And now we have to do something useful with that privilege. So I think it's a mixture of nature and nurture. I was always taking stuff apart. I was always taking apart alarm clocks and radios and toasters and getting into trouble because stuff didn't always work afterwards. I wasn't very good at it. And kids like that are often said to be ADD, and they get sedated. I wonder how many great brains we're losing because of Ritalin, But it's a question of timing and the family people are born into, and and nurture an opportunity too.
Thank you so much, Karan 605. I think we'll have to end the talk, but thank you again so much for dedicating a lot of time and effort to educate our people and share your expertise and insights. Was really great tonight. And thanks everyone for joining us tonight. Our next talk is scheduled to take place on October 1st, next week, Thursday at 5 o'clock. And our guest speaker will be Peter Fenwick, who will be discussing market research and validation of medical device innovations. Thank you again, and please have a very good night. See you next week.